Okay, so we are now working on step 7, which is evaluating premises on the basis of sufficiency. I'm just going to move that argument, make it a little bit smaller. Now, just like with relevance, when we're evaluating premises with sufficiency, we have to pay attention to the structure of the diagram because that tells us which premises we're going to evaluate together and for what purpose. So let me make a box here. Now, if I were really doing an argument entirely, I would only evaluate those premises for sufficiency that have already passed acceptability and relevance. But for right now, I'm just going to assume that everything's acceptable and everything's relevant and ask, are the premises sufficient? So, really asking, do the premises give enough evidence for the claim that they're trying to give evidence for? So, for example, I'll start at the bottom of the diagram, and here I'm going to notice that 14 is the only premise that's giving evidence to 13. So I'm going to evaluate 14 by itself. Her coat still hasn't dried, therefore she must have come not more than 2 or 3 hours. Is that sufficient evidence? And I would say, yes, that's sufficient. There is no way that she could have come farther than 2 or 3 hours without her coat having dried. That means it's sufficient. Let's go to 11. She had a small suitcase, therefore she's intending to stay overnight. Is that sufficient? It's certainly relevant, as I probably established in the last step, but isn't sufficient. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, she may be a very efficient packer. She may be going to a place where she's intending to buy clothes. I'm going to say that's insufficient. There may be other reasons why she has a small suitcase. For example, she may be a very efficient packer, or she may be planning to purchase clothes at her destination. She certainly could be planning to stay at least 2 nights and still have a small suitcase. Okay, let's go up to this level. Let's do 2, 5, and 8. Again, 2, 5, and 8 are the only pieces of evidence for some of these subarguments. Notice, though, that I'm going to have to evaluate 2 twice because I said that 2 is giving evidence to I'm going to have to evaluate 3 twice. So the question is 2 sufficient to establish 3? And I'm going to say yes. Having been in heavy rain is the most likely explanation for a damp coat. So that's sufficient to establish that the person's been in heavy rain for the last few hours. Let's go over to 5. There's dampness under her collar, therefore the person has turned the collar up against the wind. And I would say, yes, this explanation, having turned up one's collar, is the most likely one for dampness under the collar. Okay, and then 8. The umbrella is dry and unused, therefore the wind was too strong to use an umbrella. I'd say that's sufficient. Again, this explanation that the wind was too strong is the most likely one for the fact that the umbrella was unused. Now notice I could be going into a little bit more detail here in that there are other possible explanations, but this one seems to me the most likely. So it's possible that she didn't use her umbrella because she has an irrational fear of open umbrellas that she's hiding from other people. So she carries umbrellas but she never opens it. That's possible, but it seems pretty unlikely, and the most likely explanation is the wind. So I'm going to say that's sufficient. Okay, let's come up over here. Now there's only 2 premises that are supporting 19. So the question is, are 4 and 3 together sufficient? There's been no rain in London. The person has been in heavy rain in the last few hours, therefore they traveled for London, and that's sufficient. The fact that there is a condition that London has not experienced is enough evidence to establish that the person traveled to London from elsewhere. Okay, let's go over here. 13. She must not have come more than 2-3 hours, therefore she traveled from his room to 2 hours. This is sufficient. In fact, it's almost the same claim. If she only came a certain distance, then the place that she came from has to be within that distance. There is no other option. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. 13 and 12 need to be together because both 13 and 12 are giving evidence for 18. I didn't notice that. See, there's 2 pieces of evidence for 18. So she must not have come more than 2 or 3 hours. She must have come at a decent distance. But actually, it's the same thing because these are sort of different ways of claiming the same way. Therefore, she traveled. The place she traveled from is within 2 or 3 hours. So that actually works. Now, is 3 sufficient? We asked if 3 and 4 were sufficient to 19. Is 3 sufficient to 17? It's the only piece of evidence for 17. It had heavy rain, and yes, that's sufficient. If the person has been in heavy rain in the last few hours, then the place they had been in must have experienced heavy rain. There is no other option. Okay, we've done 4, 3, 13, 12. Let's do 6 and 9. Evidence for strong wind. They turned up their coat collar against the wind, and the wind was too strong. Therefore, I'd say that's sufficient. The person has experienced strong wind, which means necessarily that the place they had been in had strong wind. There is no other option. Okay, so we've done all of these, and we've done 3 twice. Now we get to here. There are 5 premises. We assume they're all true. Are they sufficient? And I would say they are sufficient. These premises together list several characteristics of the place that the person traveled from, and then indicate that there is only one place that has all of those characteristics. The place that is mentioned in the conclusion. If all the premises are acceptable, this is sufficient evidence for if all the premises are acceptable, there is no alternative to the place mentioned in the conclusion. Okay, so this is an argument that really passes sufficiency, where I determined that almost every premise is sufficient for the job that it's doing. Okay, so that is step 7.